That feeling,
Yeah.
that urge, that pull towards something, a cold drink when it's hot, the satisfaction of finishing a tough project, or maybe something more complex like missing a loved one.
Hmm.
Well, today on the deep dive, we're going to zero in on that desire.
Right.
And for this exploration, we've got this incredibly insightful entry on desire from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Okay.
It's pretty hefty, actually.
Dense, I imagine.
It is, but it really is like a backstage pass to how some of the greatest minds have thought about this really core part of being human.
The very nature of wanting.
Exactly. And our mission today is to unpack all the philosophy, all the complexities, and do it in a way that's clear, engaging, and maybe even a little surprising.
That's good.
So on the surface, it seems pretty straightforward,
I
right?
guess so, yeah.
Like you want some water, you wish you could travel, desire.
Yeah.
Done.
Mm.
But then you start reading the Stanford entry, and immediately the question becomes, is that simple longing for water the same kind of mental state as, say, wishing you'd made different life choices?
Hmm.
Or preferring a certain type of music, or striving for some huge ambition?
That's interesting.
It is. Philosophers, they use this broad term, pro-attitudes, for all those things that make us lean towards something.
Pro-attitudes.
Yeah. But the real debate is if it's just one basic psychological thing, like a mechanism just pointed at different things, or if it's a whole range of different mental happenings.
Oh, so is it like one fundamental wanting with variations, or are there many distinct types of wanting?
You got it. And when you put it like that, I mean, think about it. Is my craving for pizza on Friday night the same kind of mental state as someone's deep desire for, I don't know, justice in the world?
Oh, that's a big question.
It is. It really is.
And despite this debate about what desire actually is, there is this key point of agreement. This Stanford entry really highlights it. It's that desire is deeply tied to what we do, what we feel, and what we think.
So it's not just a feeling.
No, it's much more than that. Think of it this way. Let's say Nora wants a cup of tea.
Okay, classic example.
It is. But it's not just this passive feeling she has. This desire will likely lead her to actually go and make that tea.
Right, so it leads to action.
Exactly. And she'll probably feel a craving or maybe a pleasant anticipation of that tea.
So it affects her feelings too.
And her thoughts might start drifting toward tea, and she'll probably see the idea of having that tea as a good thing.
Oh, so it influences her judgment as well.
You see. So while the big question of what is desire is still up for debate, these very real, tangible effects.
Those are what a lot of philosophers actually focus on.
Precisely.
So it sounds like our goal today isn't to nail down this one perfect definition of desire.
It's almost like a unicorn hunt if you try to do that.
Right. Instead, we're going to explore all these different ways philosophers have tried to explain it. And also, look at the huge variety of desires we actually experience.
Makes sense.
The entry actually points out that you really need both of those things, like the theory and the categorization, to really understand the philosophical debates around desire.
It's a two-pronged approach. I like it.
And the Stanford entry starts with what many consider the sort of bedrock of desire theory.
Okay. Yeah.
Action-based theories of desire.
Action-based.
Yeah. And it's often called the conservative view. And the idea here is that desire, at its core, is about our readiness to act. So feelings, thoughts, those are maybe important, maybe even crucial, but not the main thing.
They're like sidekicks.
Yeah. So back to Nora and her tea.
Right.
From this perspective, the core of her desire is simply that she's inclined to go make the tea.
Like if she really desires it, she'll get up and do something about it.
Exactly. And, this idea has some pretty deep roots. The entry actually reminds us of this very influential statement by a philosopher named Anscombe.
Okay.
And she said that the primitive sign of wanting is trying to get.
Trying to get.
Hey!
So, basic instinct, reach for what you want.
Yeah, something like that. You might think, well, if someone's trying to get something, they clearly must desire it.
Right. Seems logical.
But then you get these situations like, let's say Janet really wants a mango.
Okay.
She has a real craving, right? But she's not actually trying to get one right now because, there aren't any at home, and she can't get to the store.
So she wants it, but isn't actively trying to get it.
Right, so the theory has to kind of evolve a bit.
I see, to account for those situations.
Exactly. And so it moves from this idea of trying to the idea of disposition.
Okay.
So desire becomes this tendency to act in a way that would lead you to the thing you want.
Gotcha. So it's more about the potential to act rather than just actually trying.
Exactly. But it gets even more refined than that. Yeah. So this more sophisticated action-based theory says that desiring something, it's not just a general tendency to bring about that thing. It's a tendency to take the actions you believe will lead to it.
Oh, okay. So you need to factor in the person's beliefs about what will actually get them that thing.
Exactly. So Janet and her mango.
Right.
She might be inclined to check the fruit bowl if she thinks there's a chance a mango is there.
Makes sense.
Or she might plan a trip to the store if she believes that's how to get one.
Right. Or ask a friend who, has a mango tree in their yard.
Exactly. Whatever she believes will get her the mango. And the entry actually highlights Michael Smith as a key figure in articulating this more kind of nuanced view.
So desires are linked to actions we believe will lead to the desired outcome.
Precisely. But as with any good philosophical idea, it's not without its criticism.
Right, of course. What are they?
Well, the source mentions that even this, sophisticated version, some consider it insufficiently restrictive.
Insufficiently restrictive? What does that even mean?
I know, right? Basically, it means it's casting too wide a net. It might include things that aren't really desires.
Okay, I'm starting to see the issue. Got an example?
Yeah, the entry brings up Dennis Stamp, and he uses this tennis example. Imagine a tennis player who's totally convinced that serving a certain way will result in a double fault.
Oh, so they've got this belief that's not exactly helping their game.
Right. But because they're so nervous, they might actually be disposed to serve that way and double fault.
But hold on, do they actually desire to double fault?
That's the point. They probably don't. Their belief, combined with their nerves, might lead them to do it.
So it's not driven by a genuine desire for that outcome.
You got it.
I can relate to that. Like when I get nervous before a big presentation, I find myself checking my phone constantly, even though I really don't want to be distracted.
That's a perfect example. Your nervousness leads you to the action, even though it's not what you truly desire.
Right, exactly. And that raises a question about whether desires are the only drivers of our actions.
That's another point the entry makes.
Okay, what else is in the mix?
Well, some argue that our judgments about what's good, or even what we feel obligated to do, can motivate us independently.
So it's not always about desiring something in this action-based way.
Right. It might be about believing something is good or the right thing to do.
Interesting. So wanting something and believing it's good, both could lead to a disposition to act, but they might be fundamentally different mental states.
Precisely. Now, there's this other angle on action-based theories.
Okay.
Functionalist approaches.
Functionalist.
Yeah. These theories propose that desires aren't just dispositions to act, but they actually have the function of producing actions.
Oh, I see. So it's not just that they can lead to action, but their very purpose is to do so.
You got it. And this helps address Stampy's tennis example.
Oh, so.
Well, while the nervous player is disposed to double fault, it's not the purpose of a belief about the double fault to actually cause one.
Right. The belief isn't designed to make the player mess up.
Exactly. But the function of a desire, according to these theories, is to bring about its own fulfillment through action.
So it's a built-in purpose, you might say.
Yeah. But then there's that argument about beliefs in what's good also motivating us.
Right. How do functionalist, action-based theorists deal with that?
Well, they have a few potential responses, according to the entry.
Let's hear 'em.
Some might argue that beliefs about goodness on their own just don't have the force to really get us moving without some desire backing them up.
So the belief needs a desire to, light the fire.
Right. Others might point out that we revise our beliefs about what's good differently from how we adjust our tendencies to act.
That makes sense. I might change my mind about what's a good restaurant based on new information, but that doesn't necessarily change my desire to eat out.
Exactly. And then there's this more kind of inclusive approach,
Okay.
where action-based theorists say, okay, maybe our theory needs some extra elements. Like maybe it needs to include a disposition to feel pleasure when we get what we want.
Interesting. Because that feeling of pleasure isn't necessarily part of just believing something is good, right?
Exactly.
But then there's this whole other category of desires that action-based theories seem to struggle with.
Yeah, the desires for things that are totally beyond our control.
Oh, right, like wishing for world peace or something.
Exactly. The entry gives examples like wanting pie to be rational, wishing you'd never been born, or hoping a committee will make a decision in your favor regardless of what you do.
It's true. We do have those kinds of desires.
Yeah.
But how can they be about action?
That's the problem. And the entry notes a couple of responses from the action-based perspective.
Okay, what are they?
One is to say, look, these aren't true desires. They're more like wishes or longings.
So a different category altogether.
Right. And the other response is to say, well, maybe even in these seemingly passive cases, there's some underlying tendency to act.
But how could you act on a desire for pie to be rational?
Yeah, it's definitely stretching the definition, but it shows how committed action-based theorists are to their core idea.
It does. So
Yeah.
action-based theories, they have some intuitive appeal, but they definitely run into some tricky territory.
They do.
So what's next? Where do philosophers go from there?
Well, the Stanford entry takes us to pleasure-based theories of desire.
Okay. Pleasure-based. So these put enjoyment front and center.
Exactly. And they basically say that what sets desires apart from other mental states, especially judgments about what's good, is pleasure.
Mm.
The idea is that when we want something, we either enjoy it or we anticipate that pleasure of getting it.
That makes sense.
And that's not necessarily the case when we're just acting on a belief that something is good.
Right. I might think it's good to donate to charity, but that doesn't mean I necessarily get a jolt of pleasure from doing it.
Exactly. So pleasure is the key difference. And the entry says that the most basic version of this theory is this. Desiring something, or desiring P, is fundamentally being disposed to feel pleasure when it seems like P is happening, and displeasure when it seems like it's not.
So desire is tied to these feelings of pleasure and displeasure, depending on whether the desired thing is happening or not.
That's it. And the entry highlights Galen Strawson. He's a big defender of this view.
Okay, what's his argument?
Well, he argues that for our mental states to be about something, to have that intentionality.
Right, to be directed at something specific.
Exactly. He says that requires consciousness and pleasure and displeasure.
Well, those are some of the most conscious states we experience, right?
Exactly. They're closely tied to our wants. He also brings up this thought experiment.
Oh, I love a good thought experiment. What is it?
Imagine creatures that have no inclination to act at all.
Like plants.
Kind of, yeah. But they still have pleasure and displeasure responses that seem like desires.
So they want things even though they can't do anything about it.
Exactly.
It's almost like saying a sunflower desires the sun even though it can't physically move towards it.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And then there's Carolyn Murillo.
Okay, another philosopher.
Yeah, and she takes a more neuroscientific approach.
Mm-hmm.
She argues that desires are actually separate from action altogether, and that it's these episodes of pleasure which are linked to dopamine release in the brain that really cause our actions.
Oh, interesting. So the pleasure is driving the action.
Yeah. She says those pleasure episodes are the desires.
Desire equals pleasure in the brain. That's pretty bold.
It is, but the entry points out a big challenge to this.
Okay, what is it?
Well, it seems like pleasure often comes after a desire is satisfied.
That's true. Like, I feel pleasure from finally drinking that tea I was craving.
Exactly. So if that's the case, then pleasure and desire have to be different things, right?
It seems like it, yeah. Cause and effect.
Exactly. The desire for the tea comes first, then the pleasure of drinking it.
So pleasure-based theories, while they focus on our subjective experience, they also have their own set of issues to figure out.
They do. So where do we go next in this grand tour of desire?
Well, the Stanford entry then takes us to good-based theories of desire.
Good-based.
Yeah. These are quite different from the pleasure-based ones. They say there's a strong link between desire and our judgments about what's good.
So instead of pleasure, it's about what we believe is good.
Right. Remember how we mentioned Socrates earlier?
Yeah, where wanting something is basically the same as thinking it's good.
Exactly. And the straightforward version of this theory says, desiring something is just believing that thing is good.
Okay, so if I believe it's good to help a friend in need.
Then that belief itself means you desire to help them.
Exactly. But as with other theories, there are some hurdles.
Of course, there always are.
Right. The entry brings up David Lewis and his work using decision theory.
Decision theory.
Yeah, it's a way of formally analyzing decisions, and he argues that desire can't be the same as belief in what's good.
How so?
Well, he says if you try to fit those two things together within decision theory, you get contradictions, especially when you look at how we should rationally revise our beliefs versus our desires.
So they don't follow the same logical rules.
Exactly. And the entry does mention that some have tried to defend the link, or question if decision theory is even the right tool for this.
Right, because maybe decision theory has its limits.
Exactly. And the entry then goes on to discuss these two philosophers, Dennis Stamp and Graham Oddie.
Okay.
And they have similar ideas, actually. They suggest that desire is a kind of perception of goodness.
Perception. So
Yeah.
it's not just thinking it's good, but it actually seeming good to you.
Right, maybe even on a sensory level.
That's interesting.
And they distinguish this from belief by saying that you can believe something's good, like maybe it's the right thing to do, but it doesn't necessarily feel good or desirable to you.
Like doing your taxes.
Yeah.
It might be good for you in the long run, but it doesn't exactly fill you with desire.
Exactly. But Stampy says you can't truly desire something if it doesn't seem good in some way.
Right. There has to be that element of it appealing to you.
Exactly. And Audie adds that if you believe one action is best, but don't feel any inclination toward it.
That creates a kind of conflict, right?
Yeah, and he says that's because desires are about things seeming good.
It's like my head says I should do something, but my gut isn't into it.
Precisely. And then there's Scanlon, who we mentioned earlier.
Oh, right. He's the one who distinguishes motivating desires from those that just direct our attention.
Exactly. And his view here is that motivating desires are tied to judgments about what we have reason to do.
So it's not just about goodness, but about good reasons for action.
Precisely. But good-based theories also have to address the question of, well, non-human animals.
Oh, right. How can a cat represent something as good if it doesn't have the same kind of cognitive capacity as a human?
That's the challenge. If desire is about representing something as good, either intellectually or through perception, how can we explain animal desires?
It's like a dog wanting to chase a squirrel. Does the dog have a concept of goodness?
Exactly. And that leads us to attention-based theories.
Attention-based.
Yeah. And Scanlon actually pops up again here with his directed attention theory.
Okay, what's the focus here?
Well, it shifts away from goodness and towards reasons and how our minds engage with them. So the basic idea is that desiring something is about the thought of that thing coming up repeatedly, but in a positive light.
Oh, so it's not just that you think about it a lot, but it's that the thought keeps coming back and you're drawn to it.
Exactly. And you're drawn to the reasons that support it.
So desire is like a spotlight, highlighting the good things about what we want.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And the entry clarifies that this is mainly for what are called occurrent desires.
A current meaning.
The desires that are active in our minds right now.
Gotcha. So not the ones lurking in the background.
Exactly. But the entry also suggests this could be extended to those standing desires.
Okay, how?
Maybe it means having a tendency for your attention to be grabbed by reasons for or against something.
That's interesting. But doesn't this theory have a blind spot?
Oh, you mean how it seems to focus exclusively on reasons?
Yeah, exactly. What about all the other ways desires grab our attention? Like if I'm super into a certain band.
You're not just drawn to reasons why they're good.
Right. I'm drawn to their music, their interviews, anything related to them. It's like a magnet.
That's a great point. And it's something the theory might not fully capture.
It seems like desire's influence on our attention is way broader than just reasons.
You're right. So we've looked at action, pleasure, goodness, and attention. Now, get ready for a more scientifically grounded perspective.
Okay, hit me with it.
Learning-based theories of desire.
Learning-based. So desire is about learning.
Well, sort of. These theories, especially championed by Murillo and Schroeder, they move away from just thinking about the mind and into the brain. They want to identify desire with a real physical thing in the brain.
Okay. And which part of the brain are we talking about?
The dopamine reward system.
The pleasure center.
Makes sense. But here's the thing. Murillo and Schroeder have different ideas about how it works. Yeah. Murillo says the activity of that system is pleasure.
Okay.
And since pleasure is so tied to desire, she says desires are basically just those pleasure episodes in your brain.
So like a direct equation.
Right. But Schroeder, he says the dopamine system doesn't directly create pleasure. He says it actually drives unconscious reward-based learning.
So we learn what to desire based on what gives us rewards.
Exactly. And he sees pleasure as just one of the effects of this learning.
So for him, the desire comes first, then the pleasure as a kind of feedback.
Exactly. He's building on this idea that desires basically tell us what will function as a reward for us.
And that shapes our learning. Fascinating.
It is. The entry actually talks about this debate between Murillo and Schroeder, and it's not settled.
Right, because there's evidence for both sides.
Yeah, like the fact that dopamine release happens alongside pleasure, and stimulating that part of the brain can create pleasurable sensations.
Okay, that supports Murillo's view.
But there's also evidence that some types of pleasure happen without that specific system being involved.
That's a point for Schroeder.
Exactly. And this whole learning-based approach,
Yep.
it's a pretty big departure from the other theories.
It is. It feels a lot more mechanical, almost.
Right, and the entry even says it has low intuitive plausibility.
Meaning.
Well, the idea that you could have a desire without any feelings, any inclinations to act, it goes against our gut feeling about what desire is.
Yeah, that is hard to wrap my head around.
The entry gives this example. Imagine a creature that desires sunny days but doesn't feel good about them, bad about cloudy days, isn't motivated to make sunny days happen, and doesn't even react when it is sunny.
Wow, that's just strange.
It is. It really challenges what we think it means to want something.
It does. So where do we go from here? What other theories are there?
Well, after all these theories that focus on just one key aspect of desire.
Like action, pleasure, goodness, and attention.
Right. We finally come to the holistic theories.
Holistic meaning.
They look at the whole picture. They say we shouldn't try to reduce desire down to just one thing.
Okay, I'm listening.
So these theories propose that desire is a bunch of different features altogether.
Like what?
Things like dispositions to act based on what we believe, feelings of pleasure and displeasure, beliefs about what's good, tendencies to focus on relevant reasons, and so on.
So a big old mix of everything we've been talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To have a desire, you just need to have enough of these things.
It's like a desire checklist.
Kind of. And the entry mentions two main types of these holistic theories,
Okay.
functionalist and interpretationist.
And what's the difference?
Well, functionalists see desire as this internal state in the mind that does enough of those desire-related things.
So it's like a control center in your mind, driving all those desire-related behaviors.
Exactly. But interpretationists don't see desire as an internal state in the same way.
Okay, how do they see it?
They see it as something we attribute to a whole organism, like a person.
So it's based on their behavior.
Exactly. If someone's behavior shows enough of those desire-like patterns, then we interpret them as having those desires.
Interesting. So one is about internal mechanisms, and the other is about observing behavior.
Exactly.
And speaking of observing behavior, the entry brings up Jaworska's work on caring.
Right. And while she's not directly trying to define desire, her theory of caring actually looks a lot like a holistic theory.
Oh.
Yeah, she says caring about someone involves wanting to act for their well-being, feeling certain emotions towards them, and paying attention to their needs.
So it's like this bundle of features directed at a specific person.
Exactly. And that's similar to the structure of a holistic desire theory, just focused on caring.
That makes sense. So we covered a lot of ground on theories of desire.
We have. But the Stanford entry doesn't stop there. It then moves on to the different types of desires.
Oh, right, because not all desires are created equal.
Exactly. And the first distinction it makes is between desires for objects and desires for states of affairs. Now, this might seem simple.
Like I want a new phone versus I want to be rich.
Yeah. But there's a deeper philosophical debate here. Yeah. Most philosophers think that all desires are ultimately for states of affairs.
States of affairs.
Yeah. So it's not, I want a new phone. It's, I want the state of having a new phone.
Okay, so it's about the outcome, the situation you want to be in.
Exactly. And same for like wanting new shoes. It's really wanting to own them and wear them, not just the physical shoes themselves.
So it's not about the object itself, but the experience or relationship you have with it.
You got it. And this fits well with the idea that desires have content, like sentences.
Right, like I desire to eat pizza.
Exactly. But the entry acknowledges that we usually talk about desires in terms of objects.
It's easier to say I want that car than I want to be in a state of owning that car.
Exactly. And then there's the question of animals who might not think in such complex ways.
Right. Can a dog desire a state of affairs?
That's the challenge. But the counter-argument is that this simple language about objects might be hiding how complex desires really are.
Okay, can you give an example?
Yeah. Even with something simple like wanting tea, there are a bunch of different states of affairs that could satisfy that.
Like owning tea, brewing tea, drinking tea.
Exactly. Or even wanting to have tea available right now versus sometime in the future. Figuring out which state would satisfy the desire reveals what it really means.
Oh, I see. So the simple I want tea actually has a lot of hidden complexity.
Right. And you can apply the same logic to animal desires.
Like a cat wanting a mouse. It's not just the mouse itself, but the state of catching and eating it.
Exactly. But even when we're talking about states of affair...
There can still be some ambiguity.
Yeah. Like if Nora wants to drink tea, is any tea okay?
Right. Does she want it hot or cold? Sweet or plain?
Exactly. And then there are conditional desires, like wanting something only if something else is true.
Like wanting to go to the beach only if it's sunny.
Exactly. And these nuances make understanding desire even more complicated.
They do.
Now, the next important distinction is between intrinsic, instrumental, and realizer desires.
Okay, these help us understand why we want what we want.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. So intrinsic desires are for things we value for their own sake.
Like enjoying a good meal. You want it just for the experience itself.
Exactly. And a lot of people would say the well-being of their loved ones is an intrinsic desire too.
Makes sense.
Then you have instrumental desires. Those are for things we want just as a means to an end.
Like wanting to make money. You don't want money for its own sake, right?
Right. It's a means to buy things you actually desire.
Exactly.
And then there are realizer desires.
Realizer.
Yeah. These are desires for an outcome that's a specific way of fulfilling an intrinsic desire.
Okay. That's a bit tricky. Yeah. Got an example?
Yeah. Like, let's say you have this intrinsic desire to be a good friend.
Okay.
And one way to be a good friend is to be there for them when they're going through a tough time.
Right.
So the desire to actually show up for your friend, that's a realizer desire.
Oh, I see. It's a specific action that embodies the broader value of being a good friend.
Exactly. And the entry actually uses second-order desires as an example.
Second-order desires. Those are desires about your own desires.
Yeah. Like want to exercise even though you currently don't.
Oh, right. I struggle with that one.
And the entry says that those are usually instrumental.
Meaning?
Well, you don't want to get rid of your desire to be lazy for its own sake.
Right. You want it because you want to be healthier, more productive, achieve your goals.
Exactly. It's all in service of those deeper intrinsic desires. However, there's this philosopher, David Lewis, who suggests that valuing something truly might mean having an intrinsic second-order desire for it.
That's interesting. So maybe sometimes those higher level desires are valuable in themselves.
Right. It makes you think about what you truly value at the deepest level.
It does.
Okay, another.